Our churches are influenced by our culture, and we deliberately adopt some practices that are familiar in our culture so as to be relevant. But sometimes bad stuff seeps in and dilutes or even corrupts the gospel. Individualism is one of these, I think, and we should attempt to get rid of it from our churches. Not just because of its corrupting influence, but because our dominant culture needs an example of a better way, and this is one of the functions of the church. Here's my list of symptoms that might indicate that your church has a little bit too much individualism. Symptom 1. Congregants misunderstand the purpose of the church. What is the purpose of your church? Not the stated purpose, but the unstated one. In a church dominated by individualism, a lot of people will think the function of the church is to assist in the creating of the self. Some will have to leave because ultimately the church might not support all possible selves. But for the ones that stay, their attendance will be conditional. The church will need to not just tolerate, but to affirm expressions of the self. This approach can create a misunderstanding of grace. Our affirmation is already received when we are clothed in Christ. We already have affirmation. No need to demand it. You might have an individualism problem in your church if you have a disproportionate number of attenders as opposed to members. People under the influence of individualism will be hesitant to become members. Once you commit to membership, you've limited your options, and this is hard for individualists. Also, to become a member implies that you have accepted the church's authority over your life. This is, of course, a problem because the individualist hates to submit. And from the other side, this is, of course, a problem because one of the main functions of the church is to sanctify and to admonish and to instruct. In a church dominated by individualism, you will be singing a lot of songs with personal pronouns. I, me, and my songs in corporate worship. This doesn't make sense. The one time in the week when we all come together as a people, plural, of God, we still worship God standing there as individuals. So what we are doing is collectively reinforcing the individualism that bombards us all week long. The church should, in all ways, be the place where we encounter reality. The reality that we are not just individuals. And through this encounter on Sunday, we are equipped to carry it out into the world the other 6 days of the week. I wonder if we shouldn't eliminate all I, me, and my songs from corporate worship. Not because they are all bad, but because we desperately need retraining to help us to understand that we are members of a body. But a lot of David's psalms are I, me, my songs. If it's good enough for David, shouldn't it be good enough for us? Yes, David used personal pronouns in his songs, the Psalms. But David didn't live in a culture that was dominated by an identity-twisting radical individualism. He had personal feelings, but those feelings had no authority. In our day, this is not the case. Feelings are authoritative. Should we not more deliberately combat this cultural idolatry by eliminating its most explicit expressions from our worship services? The fourth symptom. Does your church see faith as something that you hold individually? When we think of faith, we think of it as an internal, personal, subjective state. But we find a much broader understanding of faith in the Bible. Groups of people and families can be characterized as faithful, and not in the sense that all the individuals have faith. In the Bible, people seem to be implicated in the faith of their families and the communities to which they belong. Look at the healing of the paralyzed man in Mark 2. He was healed because of the faith of his friends. He was even forgiven of his sins. Of course, people come to Christ as individuals, but our individualism clouds what this means. An individualistic church or person believes that becoming a Christian is almost exclusively a personal choice. I have decided to follow Jesus. Does God have some role in a person becoming a Christian? Now, I don't think that any church teaches that we choose God 100%. But do the people know that? Testimonies at professions of faith and believer baptism are often full of phrases like, I wanted to take the next step. I realized that I needed God. I'm taking a step of obedience. They make no mention of God pursuing them, calling them, drawing them into the family. And we make it even more individualistic when the congregation does nothing more than applaud when someone professes their faith or are baptized. All that is expected of me is to put my hands together a few times. And then my responsibility is finished. Everything else after this is up to them as an individual. In more traditional ceremonies of baptism, the congregation makes a promise before God to support the individual on their faith journey. As far as I know, no church teaches that it's all an individual decision, but we live in a culture saturated with individualism. So you can't tell the people just once. You might be an individualist if you do the thing called church shopping. Did you choose your church? We don't really have much of a problem in leaving one congregation and going to another one because my old church didn't meet my needs. Or they started preaching things I didn't agree with, or I got sick of the music, or whatever. The whole idea of switching churches is individualism at work. Oh, there can be reasons to switch churches, but back in our less individualistic past, leaving a church was a lot more like leaving a marriage. The church was a family, and you don't pick your family. You can see how all these things are related. It comes down to the idea that if you can choose to become a Christian, then you can certainly choose your church, and if you choose to belong to a particular congregation, you can certainly choose to leave it. You or your church might be under the influence of individualism if all the sermons end with an application that applies to individuals, or that the congregants take it only as a personal application and not one that is directed toward the body. The last symptom is you read the Bible through a lens of individualism. Real quickly, here are just a few examples on how we do this. Psalm 37, verse 4. Take delight in the Lord, and He will give you the desires of your heart. God will give me the desires of my individual heart? That's pretty cool. It doesn't mean that. It's not about you getting the promotion or that girl or that guy or 1 million followers on Instagram. The focus of this verse is about the community taking delight in the Lord. And when we as a community do that, the desires of our hearts change to be aligned with His desires. Then we get the things the Lord desires for us, and we are happy about it. Jeremiah 29, verse 11. For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord. Plans to prosper you and not to harm you. Plans to give you hope and a future. This is not a message from God to individuals. Read verses 10 to 14. This is God's promise to His people, way back when they were facing exile. So it's not about the individual. Matthew 5, verses 13 to 16. You are the salt of the earth, but if the salt loses its saltiness, how can it be made salty again? It is no good for anything except to be thrown out and trampled underfoot. You are the light of the world. A town built on a hill cannot be hidden. Neither do people light a lamp and put it under a bowl. Instead, they put it on its stand, and it gives light to everyone in the house. In the same way, let your light shine before others, that they may see your good deeds and glorify your Father in heaven. Neither salt nor town are individuals. They're groups. Christ's desire is for us to be salt and light as a group, as a body, as the church, not simply as individuals. These are just a few examples of how we read the Bible with an individualistic lens. If you don't agree with all my 8 symptoms, that's fine. Discard 1 or 2. But I think we ought to be open to some of them, most of them. If we don't, we can't be an example to our culture, which desperately needs to see another way. Lest anyone wants to push back against my assertion that individualism is a problem in the church and in our lives, in my next video, I will be making a biblical case for bringing back a balance where we celebrate individuality within the context of community. Thank you, and we will see you there.